There is a phrase in Valhari military tradition older than our ships, older than the compact itself, that translates, roughly, to this: when a thing cannot be recovered, grieve it and move forward. We are, as a species, extraordinarily efficient grievers. We do not linger. We do not bargain with probability. When the Strategic Loss Assessment Board marks a name unrecoverable, the flag is filed, the family is notified, and the war continues. Grief is a resource with a budget. Princess Sarah Valathorin of the Third Dominion had been marked unrecoverable for 19 months. Her ship, vaporized in a Keth ambush at the Hallow Corridor. Her personal guard, all confirmed dead. Her biological signature, absent from every recovery sweep. Her political weight, the ceasefire she was carrying in a sealed diplomatic cortex implanted behind her left ear, gone with her. The war that followed her disappearance killed 400,000 people. We grieved her efficiently. We moved forward. And then, 19 months later, a human walked out of Keth-held space carrying her. Not rescued her. Not found her. Carrying her unconscious, wrapped in what appeared to be his own jacket, boots, and an improvised sling made from cargo webbing and what our forensics team later identified as the disassembled strap of a Keth rifle. He was bleeding from at least 3 locations, had no ship, no team, no visible weapon, just a look on his face like a man who had somewhere to be and was annoyed the universe kept getting in the way. He didn't ask for credit. He asked for coffee. I was the officer who processed him. I am still, 19 months later, trying to fully explain what I witnessed in that debriefing room. I have filed 4 separate reports. My commanding officer has rejected 3 of them on the grounds that they read more like spiritual literature than military documentation. She is not wrong. But something happened in that room. Something I don't have the right vocabulary for. And, since the Compact's official record will sanitize it into operational language, dry and bloodless and wrong, I'm writing this one down the way it actually was. This is what I saw. The border station at Vethkalos is not a glamorous posting. I say this not as complaint but as context, because when people hear border station they picture something dramatic. Tactical screens, wartime chatter, officers with sharp uniforms making sharp decisions in a sharp, decisive manner. Vethkalos is a prefabricated pressurized module bolted to the underside of an asteroid that smells permanently of the algae protein paste someone spilled in the ventilation system in year 2 and never fully cleaned. It has 37 staff. Our primary function is logging debris fields, monitoring the Hallow Corridor for Keth encroachment, and filing weekly reports that I suspect nobody reads. I am Sub-Commander Torvin Ailish, 3rd Compact Border Authority. I have been at Vethkalos for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. I know this because I have been keeping a log, not the official kind, the personal kind, the kind where I record things like day 847, the heating unit in bunk corridor 3 made a sound today like a dying Grethbird and everyone pretended not to hear it because otherwise the sameness of days here will erode whatever cognitive structure I still have. My commanding officer, Senior Commander Preth Vason, handles the boredom differently. She makes tea and stares at the wall. She has been doing this for 6 years. I find it unsettling. She finds my log-keeping unsettling. We have reached a respectful détente on the subject of each other's coping mechanisms. The morning the human arrived, I was documenting that the algae protein smell had migrated to Junction Corridor B. This was entry 891. The external proximity alert sounded at 0340 station time, which is the middle of what passes for our night cycle. I was already awake because I am a poor sleeper and was on my 3rd rotation of rereading a technical manual I don't need just to give my brain something to grip. I heard the alert, noted it, and assumed debris, which accounts for roughly 90% of our proximity flags. I pulled up the sensor feed from my bunk console without sitting up. The object on the screen was not debris. It was a humanoid figure in a partial pressure suit, one of ours, compact issue, but modified badly, supplemented with what the scanner identified as Keth material overlaid on top of compact material in a configuration our system had no classification for, drifting at low velocity approximately 200 meters from the station's primary docking port. It was carrying something. I sat up. The figure was carrying a second humanoid, secured across its body in some kind of improvised harness, the second figure's arms folded across their chest and head lolling in a way that made my circulatory system do something unpleasant. The carrying figure was moving under its own power propulsion pack, short controlled bursts, but the bursts were irregular. Weakening. The figure was running out of fuel or running out of will, and, given the way it was moving, I couldn't determine which. I logged 0342 unidentified contact, 2 bodies, 1 mobile, 1 inert, bearing on primary dock. Then, I woke the commander. Preth Vason answered her calm on the second tone, which means she was already awake. She always seemed to be already awake. I have a private theory that she stopped sleeping sometime in year 3 and simply didn't tell anyone. Sensor flag, I said. Humanoid contact. 2 individuals. One appears incapacitated. A pause. Keth? The profile doesn't match. The suit is partially compact issue. The propulsion signature is. I checked the read again. I don't have a classification match. The computer is generating an error. Another pause, longer. I heard her set down her tea. Bring them in. Full quarantine protocol. I want eyes on them before they breathe our air. It took 20 minutes to guide the figure into our secondary dock, a process complicated by the fact that they didn't respond to hails on any of our standard frequencies, and, for the first 12 minutes we thought they might be dead or delirious, guiding on instinct alone. Then, on minute 13, they responded to a hail on an emergency frequency so outdated our system flagged it as deprecated and generated a tooltip explaining it hadn't been in active use for over 30 years. The response was, I read you. I need a medic, a meal, and, if you have anything resembling coffee, I will owe you a significant personal debt. In that order. The voice was male, and the accent was, I had to run it through 2 filters to confirm human. Terran human. English language subset. I stared at my screen. We have 2 humans on the station. Technical Specialist Yura and Maintenance Officer Dal, both from a colony world, both thoroughly unremarkable, both currently asleep in their bunks. Neither had signed out. Confirmed human contact, I logged, for my own benefit more than anyone else's. Unknown individual. I brought them in. The secondary dock is small. When the outer door sealed and atmosphere equalized and I came through the interior hatch, there was a moment before the lights fully cycled where I could only see them in the blue emergency strips, 2 shapes, one upright, one still. Then, the lights came up. The standing figure was human. Male. What I estimated at 35 to 40 Terran years, though I later learned I was wrong by 6 years in either direction and still don't know which way. He was tall enough that he'd had to duck slightly coming through the hatch, and he was built in the solid, distributed way of someone who spent a lot of time carrying weight over long distances. The pressure suit was, as the scanner had indicated, a compact issue base modified with Keth materials, chest plates, the left arm from elbow to shoulder, the right boot in a way that should not have been structurally coherent but, apparently was. There was a seam at the left hip where he'd stitched the 2 materials together with what appeared to be wire. He was bleeding from a gash along his right forearm, from something at his left temple that had bled and dried and bled again, and, from a place at his side he was clearly keeping very still. The figure he was carrying was secured across his body in a harness made from cargo webbing and a rifle strap, arms crossed, head supported by a length of material I recognized belatedly as the lining of a compact officer's formal jacket. The formal jacket. The formal jacket worn by ranking members of the Dominion Diplomatic Corps. My eyes moved from the harness to the carried figure's face, which was tilted slightly away, and then the figure shifted and I saw the profile, and the cheekbone structure, and the specific geometric tattoo at the base of the throat that I had seen in exactly one other context, the memorial portrait. Broadcast on every compact channel at the announcement of her designation as unrecoverable. I stopped moving. The human looked at me. He had dark eyes, the kind that seemed to be doing a lot of work regardless of what his face was doing, and his face at the moment was doing something that I can only describe as politely exhausted, not afraid, not triumphant, not whatever I would have been in his position. Just a man who had completed a task and was waiting for the next one. Sub-Commander, he said. He read the rank from my collar. She's alive. Hypothermic, sedated, I did that, she was going to get us both killed with noise, and she's been in low nutrition for probably 3 weeks. But, alive. I did not speak. The sedative is Keth origin, I don't know the exact compound. I can write down approximately where I found it and approximately how much I used, and you'll want to get that to a medic faster than I got here. He paused. Which was faster than I expected, honestly. Your navigation beacons in the corridor are better than the Keth briefings indicated. The Keth, I said. My voice came out a register lower than I intended. You came from Keth-held space. Yes. Through the Hallow corridor. Mostly. I went around the western edge of the Fenris shelf for the last leg. The corridor has a patrol rotation that's, he moved his head slightly, something between a shake and a considering tilt, predictable. Which is funny, because predictability is the thing I kept waiting to find and not finding elsewhere. He said this the way someone says the weather's been strange lately. An observation. Not a boast. The Hallow corridor has a casualty rate that our strategic assessment team uses as a threshold metric for determining whether an operation is viable. Viable means the expected losses are lower than the corridor's baseline. Many operations do not meet this threshold. He had just told me he went through it alone and navigated by its patrol schedule. My training kicked in, which is to say I stopped feeling things in order to process them later. Medic, I said into my calmed secondary doc. Now. Then, because I was still processing, you said you want coffee. If you have it. He shifted the weight of the woman he was carrying, and, for the first time I saw the strain in the adjustment, the microsecond where the professional composure cracked and the cost of carrying that weight over whatever distance he'd carried it showed up in his shoulders, his jaw. Then, it was gone. It's not the most important thing. I've been running on whatever the Keth keep in those gray canisters, and I don't know what it is, but it tastes like industrial solvents, and I would genuinely appreciate something that tastes like a beverage a person chose to drink. I'll find you some, I said. I'm not sure why I said it. It wasn't protocol. There are 12 things I should have said first, and coffee was not among them. But he'd been carrying a person across the Hallow corridor alone, and what he asked for was coffee and something about that made me want very badly to be the station that had it. The medic specialist Khan, a Velhari of approximately 60 years who had the bedside manner of particularly unsentimental furniture, arrived, took one look at the carried figure, and made a sound I had never heard from her before in 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. That's, she started. Yes, the human said. He was already working at the harness buckles with his non-bleeding hand, moving with the ease of someone who'd assembled and disassembled the thing several times. I know this face. Most people do. He got the last buckle and eased the woman off his body with a care that was incongruous with everything else about him, the suit, the blood, the general impression of someone assembled from salvage, careful in the specific way of someone who has been careful with this one thing for a very long time. She needs warmth first. The hypothermia is more immediately dangerous than the sedation. I kept her as warm as I could, but I was running limited insulation for the last, he paused, calculating 40 hours, roughly. Khan was already moving, already issuing orders through her calm, her voice flat and clipped and doing nothing to process the magnitude of what she was touching. I watched her take the princess of the third dominion from the arms of a human I had no record of and tell him, without looking up, to sit down before he fell down. He sat. He sat the way a building subsides, slowly, not collapsing, just acknowledging that vertical was no longer necessary. I stood in the middle of my secondary dock at Vethkalos, which smelled like algae protein and had 37 personnel and filed reports no one read, and I looked at this man, bleeding, exhausted, wearing a suit that was half Keth material held together with wire, and I thought, who are you? I didn't ask it. I logged it instead, in my personal log, entry 891, which I had started that morning documenting the migration of an unpleasant smell. 0401 Unknown human male. Delivered, one living Sarah Valathorin, Princess of the Third Dominion, marked unrecoverable 19 months prior. No team. No ship. No apparent explanation. Requested coffee. The coffee machine in the officer corridor is broken. I am going to fix it. He drank 3 cups of what I later admitted was technically emergency stimulant grade instant heated in a filtered container, which is structurally coffee the way a pressure suit is structurally clothing, technically true in ways that matter and false in ways that also matter. He didn't complain. He held the container in both hands like something precious and drank with his eyes half closed and didn't say anything for 4 minutes, which was the longest he'd been silent since arriving. I sat across from him in the secondary dock's single debrief chair, a chair that had been used mostly for cargo manifests and the occasional crew psychological evaluation, and I watched him, and I tried to assemble a picture from the fragments he'd given me. My training says to begin with identifying information. Your name, I said. Kale, he said. Kale Morrow. No rank current, I resigned my commission 9 months ago. He said this without visible emotion, which is to say it was the kind of statement a person makes when the emotion attached to it has been handled somewhere private and not recently reopened. Resigned. I made a note. You were compact military. Terran Special Operations, attached to Compact Joint Command. For about 7 years. He looked at the container in his hands. Then, I wasn't. What were you doing in Keth-held space? A pause. Looking for her, he said. I looked at him. He looked at the container. You were on your own? Yes. For how long? He thought about this. Not calculating, I realized. Remembering. I went in about 6 weeks after she was declared unrecoverable. He said the word the way someone says a bureaucratic term they find personally insulting, with the specific flatness of disagreement suppressed into neutrality. So, approximately 17 months. I wrote nothing in my official log for 11 seconds. I know this because I replay that moment, still, and count the seconds I sat there not writing. You were in Keth-held space, I said carefully, for 17 months. Give or take. Alone. Mostly. He made a small motion with one hand, not dismissive, just modulating. I had local contacts periodically. People who well. People. He did not explain what kind of people. I did not press. The Compact's intelligence apparatus would press later, with significantly more resources and significantly less coffee. I looked at the sealed door of the medical bay across the dock, behind which Khan was working on a woman who had been dead for 1.5 years. Why? I asked. It came out quieter than I intended. He looked up. He met my eyes, and I watched him assess the question, not whether to answer, I realized, but which version of the answer to give, because there were several and they were layered in ways I wasn't sure I had clearance for. Because, he said finally, she was the ceasefire. He said it the way you'd say because the hull was breached or because the reactor was going critical. A fact that explained a decision. A calculation. But, his hands were still wrapped around that container. She was the ceasefire, I repeated. The agreement she was carrying. The diplomatic cortex implant. It was the framework for ending the Eastern Theater. 60% of active casualties in the last 18 months have been in that theater. He turned the container slightly. A small rotation. A habit. Someone had to go get it. I wanted to ask, why you? Why alone? Why not with a team and a sanctioned operation and the full weight of the Compact behind the effort? I had access to that answer. I had been at this station long enough to know what unrecoverable meant. What the Strategic Loss Assessment Board's determination had meant. What it meant that no official retrieval had been attempted. The board, I started. Filed the flag, he said. Yes. And you disagreed with their math. He said it so simply. Disagreed with their math. Like arguing about a cargo weight estimate. Like the 17 months in enemy territory was just him presenting a counter-analysis. I looked at this man, this bleeding, wire-stitched, gray canister-fueled, resigned commission, solo infiltration man, sitting in my debrief chair at 0430 station time drinking emergency instant coffee from a filtered container, and, I thought, I have filed 347 cargo manifests at this station. I have logged the migration path of an algae protein smell. I have never once, in 2 years and 4 months, had a single thing happen here that I would remember. I picked up my personal log. Entry 891 continued. He said he disagreed with their math. I believe him. I don't know what to do with that yet. I'm going to find out what's in the gray canisters. The commander arrived at 0512, her tea in her hand, her face doing nothing interpretable. She looked at the human. She looked at the sealed medical bay door. She looked at me. Report, she said. Human male, I said. Cale Morrow, formerly Terran Special Operations, currently no affiliation. Arrived at 0342 carrying 1 living cerevalothorin, condition hypothermic and sedated but stable. Self-transported from Ketheld space, no ship, solo operation. Duration of operation approximately 17 months. The commander looked at the human again. The human, who had been watching this exchange with an expression of mild attentive patience, said, I'm sorry to arrive without notice. I didn't have a way to signal ahead. The transmission risk in the corridor is high enough that I prioritized movement over communication. Preth Vason was silent for 7 full seconds. Then, she said, my adjutant will get you to medical. I appreciate that. You'll be debriefed. I expected so. Thoroughly. Also expected. He started to stand. It cost him more than the sitting had. I watched the left side of him resist and watched him override it. I'll cooperate fully. I have detailed logs of every contact, location, and resource I used. I kept records. He paused. I'm a thorough person. Vason looked at me. I had no useful expression to offer her. She looked back at him. Morrow, she said. Commander. Whatever you did in there to keep her alive that long. A pause, and, in the pause, Preth Vason, who had been making tea and staring at walls for 6 years, looked briefly like someone who had not yet processed something fully. You'll tell me about it. She made a small motion with her tea hand, addressed. Yes, he said. It's a long story. Most of the real ones are, she said, and drank her tea. I stood in the middle of the secondary dock and I looked at the door of the medical bay and I thought about a woman who had been dead for 19 months and wasn't. I thought about the math. About what it meant to look at a calculation and say, no. Wrong. I'll show you. Entry 891, continued, 0512. Commander arrived. Human male Cale Morrow taken to medical. Princess Valathorin's vital signs stable. The algae protein smell has, as of today, fully reached Junction Corridor B. Some things persist regardless. Have a problem with my official reports. Not a factual problem. The facts are correct. I have checked them 7 times because my commanding officer checked them twice and the Compact Intelligence Directorate checked them a further 4 times after she escalated, and we all arrived at the same facts, so the facts are not the problem. The problem is that the official report does not contain the parts that I cannot explain without sounding like someone who has been at a remote border station for too long and begun to develop philosophical tendencies. 3 weeks after Cale Morrow arrived at Vethkalos, he was still here. This was not the plan. The plan, insofar as a plan crystallized rapidly out of the chaos of his arrival, was to stabilize him medically, take his debrief, and transfer him to the Compact Intelligence Facility at Henneth Station along with the princess, who was the operational priority. Everything else was secondary. Everything else could be processed elsewhere by personnel with more clearance and better coffee and office chairs that didn't list to the left. The princess was transferred on day 4, stabilized and conscious and still sedated enough that the medics had agreed she should be moved by medship rather than anything faster. The diplomatic cortex implant was intact. I watched the medship leave from the observation bay and then went to file the most significant document of my career, which was a 1-paragraph addendum to a standard arrival log that said, in essence, she was here. She is now not here. She is alive. Cale Morrow could not be transferred on day 4. He had 2 broken ribs, stress fractures, the kind accumulated over time rather than from a single impact, a shoulder that had been dislocated and reset without proper equipment at some point in the past 6 months, an infection in the side wound that Khan addressed with language I had not previously heard from her, and a course of treatment that she described to me afterward as aggressive, with a particular emphasis that suggested she'd had to argue the treatment down from something worse. He had also, upon finally submitting to a full medical scan, revealed a healed fracture in his left leg that had knit imperfectly because it hadn't been immobilized properly when it happened.
How long ago? Khan asked him about the leg.
The break?
About 8 months. When did you stop walking with a compensation gait?
He thought about it.
I didn't notice when.
Khan's expression at this information was the same expression she uses when the station's air recycler outputs a diagnostic error, a look that acknowledges a problem and immediately begins categorizing the scope of the required intervention.
You'll be here 3 weeks minimum, she told him.
I can be transferred to Henneth on light transport. I don't need full. You'll be here 3 weeks minimum, she said again in the same tone.
Not louder. Just immovable.
He was there 3 weeks.
I should explain why I kept going to medical.
Official reason: I was the receiving officer. It was my report.
I had questions about his debrief testimony that required follow-up.
This is all true and also is the kind of true that is technically complete and practically partial, which is the category of truth I have been thinking about a lot since he arrived. The fuller version is, I kept going because he was the most interesting person within approximately 300 million kilometers, and I am a thorough person working at a station that generates entries about air protein migration patterns, and the combination of those two facts was more powerful than my professional dignity. He was also, I noticed on the 3rd visit, keeping his own logs. He wrote them by hand on physical paper, which he had requested from our supply stores, and he wrote in a way that was habitual, not deliberate, not performed, the way you do something you've been doing for years. When I came in, he would set the pen down and the paper would go face down on the bed frame, and I respected this because I understood it completely. What I want to document here, because the official record will not contain it, is what the 3 weeks of debrief conversations actually were. Not the formal sessions, which were handled by Commander Vason and an intelligence directorate liaison who arrived on day 6 and left on day 12 with 300 pages of testimony and an expression of controlled disturbance. The formal sessions I was not present for except as note-taker for 2 early hours of general orientation.
The informal ones.
The ones at 2100 station time when Khan's rotation ended and the medical bay was quiet and I was on paperwork that could technically wait but conveniently couldn't, in a chair I'd started leaving there. Tell me something, I said, on the 5th night. He was looking at the ceiling, which is what he did when he wasn't writing or sleeping.
Not vacant processing. I'd learned the difference. Something specific, he said. How did you know she was still alive?
He turned his head. He looked at me with the dark working eyes.
I didn't, he said. When I went in. I hadn't expected that answer.
I'm not sure what I had expected: conviction, certainty, some calculation that justified the 17 months in terms I could log.
I waited. The Keth ambush at the Hallow Corridor, he said.
I reviewed the combat record. The official one and the parts of the unofficial one I could access before I left.
He paused.
The ship was destroyed. The guard was killed. But there was no biological confirmation for her specifically. The blast patterns indicated the midship section had partial shielding failure instead of full structural collapse, which meant the possibility of a survivable space was low, not zero.
Low, I said.
Between 4 and 9%, depending on how you weighted the shield failure data.
4 and 9%.
I thought about the Strategic Loss Assessment Board and their threshold calculations. I thought about the 400,000 who died in the Eastern Theater in the months after she disappeared, while her ceasefire framework sat in a diplomatic cortex implant in whatever space she'd survived into. You went into Keth territory, I said, carefully, for a 4 to 9% probability.
The probability that she was alive, yes.
He looked back at the ceiling. The probability that she was retrievable if alive was a separate calculation.
And that one?
Lower, he said.
I sat with this for a moment. You resigned your commission before you went in, I said. Yes. Why? Because the operation wasn't sanctioned. He said this without bitterness. Just filing it.
If I'd gone in with a commission, I'd have been operating under compact authority without authorization, which creates legal and political exposure for the compact if I'm captured or killed. Without it, I'm a private individual making poor personal decisions. The liability is contained. I thought about the math of this. The way he'd constructed the liability question before he walked into enemy space for 17 months. That's a very structured way to think about it. It was a structured problem, he said. It was a 17-month solo infiltration. Those require structure. I stared at him. He had the mildest expression. Not evasive, genuinely unthreatened by the fact that I was staring at him. I had spent 5 days trying to read him and I kept arriving at the same wall, not a performance of calm, not suppression of something louder, just actual equanimity. The kind that isn't born, only constructed, over a long time, out of necessity. What held it together? I asked. 17 months. What was the anchor? He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, the math was wrong. He said it the way he'd said it in the dock. I disagreed with their math. But, softer this time, in the dark of the medical bay, with no audience and no performance in it. That's it? I said. That's a lot. He looked at the ceiling. When the board files a determination, it closes the question. That's the function of it, close the question, redirect resources, move forward. It's the right call operationally. 19 times out of 20, it is unambiguously the right call. And, the 20th? The 20th time, he said, someone has to be the person who checked. I wrote this down. Not in the official log. In my personal one, at 2143 on day 5. Someone has to be the person who checked. He said this like it was a job. Like it was a role that needed filling and, he filled it because it was there to fill, not for any of the reasons I would have expected. I keep trying to find the heroism in it and, I keep finding something more functional than that. Something that bothers me more than heroism would. I don't know the word for it. Day 9, he started walking. Khan had said day 12, minimum, before he'd be cleared for movement, and, on day 9 he was walking circuits of the medical bay with his ribs taped in, his shoulder in a partial brace and, his imperfectly healed leg doing something that I technically couldn't call a limp because it was too deliberate, more like an accommodation, a constant low-level negotiation with a body he was used to negotiating with. You're going to tell Khan, he said, on his second circuit, when I came in. I'm thinking about it, I said. I need to walk. The shoulder and ribs need rest, the leg needs movement. He made the turn at the far wall. It's balance. She'll point out you're doing it 3 days early. I'll tell her my mental health requires it. I thought about this. Does it? He made the turn again. The walls were very close together in several places I was in for extended periods, he said, without particular emphasis. I manage better when I can move. I sat in my chair, which I'd named, in my personal log, the chair, because I'd started thinking of it as the chair, the specific one, the one I came to, and I watched him walk his circuits. Can I ask about her? I said. The princess. He did not change his pace. I was learning that he was not a person who announced his internal responses through physical tells. Changes registered, but they registered finely, in the stillness of them rather than in motion. What about her, he said. When you found her. What was the situation? A circuit. Keth detention facility, he said. Western Corridor region. She'd been there for approximately 16 months of the 19. He paused. She was alive because she was valuable as a political asset. They knew who she was. And, the first 3 months? There was a smaller holding location before the facility. I don't have complete information about that period. He made the turn. She hadn't been treated well. In the facility, they treated her with the specific kind of care that says, "This is a resource we intend to use." His voice stayed level.
It's its own kind of damage. She was awake when you found her?
Yes. What happened when you? He stopped his circuit. He stood at the far wall and looked at it and then looked at me, and, for the first time in 9 days, I saw something shift behind the equanimity, something that didn't announce itself but was present, abruptly, the way a light being on in a window announces presence in a dark house. She heard me come through the vent access, he said. She was already positioned to attack. She'd made a weapon out of a bed support brace and some cabling. It was a decent construction, honestly, given the materials available.
He paused. She was going to use it.
She had no way to know I wasn't Keth. I called out in Valhari, gave my name and said I was compact, and she stopped moving, but she didn't lower the weapon.
What did she say?
She said, "Prove it."
I looked at him.
So I said, "The compact filed you as unrecoverable about 17 months ago, and I've spent the intervening time disagreeing with that assessment, and right now we have approximately 11 minutes before the next guard rotation, so you can either choose to trust me on a thin basis or we can discuss verification options, but the 11 minutes is a real constraint."
I considered this. And?
She lowered the weapon, he said.
She said, "Fine. 11 minutes.
He resumed his circuit. I started, and stopped, and tried again. She wasn't incapacitated. She'd been in there for 16 months and she still had a weapon and she's a practical person, he said. It was not a compliment with softness in it. It was a harder kind of recognition. She managed herself. She kept herself functional. She did what she could do in the space available.
He made the turn.
When we were moving out, she was limited physically, which was the nutrition deficit and some other effects of the detention, but she was present. Strategically engaged.
She helped with the extraction? She was essential to it.
He said this without emphasis, and the lack of emphasis made it land more solidly than emphasis would have.
I knew the facility's structure.
She knew the guards' behavioral patterns. She'd had 16 months to observe them.
We combined the information and built a route. I sat very still.
She helped plan her own extraction, I said.
Collaboratively, yes.
I thought about the woman in the memorial portrait, the formal image, the diplomatic bearing, the political symbolism that had been grieved efficiently and moved past. I thought about her in a cell for 16 months, building a weapon out of a bed frame, cataloging guard behaviors, waiting.
The sedative, I said. At the end, you sedated her. In the final push through the corridor. He nodded.
We had a section where noise discipline was critical and, she was operating on physical reserves that were nearly exhausted and pain that she was managing through will alone, and there was a point where will alone wasn't going to be enough to guarantee silence.
We agreed on the sedative.
Agreed.
Yes. He glanced at me. She made the call.
I provided the option, she assessed it, she authorized it.
A small pause.
She also specified the dosage and timing parameters. She'd been doing her own calculations about the compound based on what she'd observed in the facility.
I had no words for approximately 12 seconds.
She's exceptional, I said finally, because it was the only word that fit inside 12 seconds.
Yes, he said simply. It was not a lovesick yes. It was not a complicated yes.
It was the same register as everything else he said, observed, accurate, unflinching. He had gone into Keth's space to retrieve a ceasefire framework and found a person who had been managing her own survival with the materials available, and he had said yes to the ceasefire and yes to the person in the same breath, and I believed both, and I believed neither diminished the other. I wrote in my personal log, Day 9.
He walked circuits. She had a weapon.
She made the call on the sedative.
The board said unrecoverable.
The board was doing math on a closed question.
There are people who open closed questions. I don't know what to do with the fact that some of them are human. On day 14, the Intelligence Directorate liaison came back.
Not the same one, a different one, senior, with a rank marker I recognized as CID-3, which is the classification for operations officers involved in active intelligence work rather than just information gathering. She arrived on a fast courier with 2 junior staff and an air of professional purpose that made the entire station feel like a waiting room.
She wanted Morrow in a formal session immediately. He went. I was not included in this one.
I sat at my desk and filed 3 cargo manifests and logged that the algae protein smell had apparently begun to reverse its migration, which I noted with an asterisk as possibly significant, methodology unclear, and tried not to think about what was happening down the corridor. He came back 4 hours later, sat in the medical bay, and didn't pick up his writing paper.
I came in at 2100.
He was looking at the ceiling. They want to bring charges, he said.
I sat down. For the unauthorized operation, I said.
For the unauthorized operation, the misrepresentation to the border authority at the Rick station when I entered the disputed zone, and, some related, he made a small gesture, creative logistics regarding resource acquisition during the 17 months.
Meaning you took things.
From Keth's supply caches, primarily.
A pause. They're calling it theft of military material in an operational context. You were operating in enemy territory. Without sanction.
He turned his head.
The resources I used were legitimately characterized as theft. The charges are technically accurate.
The charges are, I stopped myself from saying what I thought of the charges.
What happens to them?
CID-3 indicated the Directorate is inclined to recommend a suspended determination contingent on full cooperation and transfer of all intelligence gathered during the operation.
He paused.
Which I was going to give them regardless.
I thought about this.
So they're going to hold a technicality over you, I said. They're going to manage the narrative, he said, without rancor. If they charge and convict, the story becomes unauthorized agent, rogue operation, the compact doesn't condone. If they suspend and cooperate, the story becomes recovered intelligence asset, successful outcome, moving forward.
He looked at the ceiling again.
Either way, the ceasefire framework gets to the negotiating table and the Eastern Theater has a path to resolution. That's the part that matters. I stared at him. He was telling me the part that mattered, and it wasn't his charges. It wasn't the 17 months. It wasn't any of the things that I, sitting in my listing chair at a station that smelled like protein paste, would have wanted acknowledged if I'd done what he'd done.
Morrow, I said. Sub-Commander. I am going to ask you something and I want an honest answer. He waited. Are you fine?
He turned his head again and looked at me, and this time the working eyes were different.
Not performing assessment. Something more direct.
No, he said.
Just that. No.
Okay, I said.
But, I will be.
He said it with the same quality as everything else, calibrated, precise, the statement of someone who had thought about it and arrived at a reasonable projection.
I've been not fine before.
The architecture is familiar. The architecture, I repeated. When it happens, you build structure around it and the structure holds until the not fine resolves.
Routine. Task. Obligation. He glanced at the ceiling. Writing.
I thought about his personal log going face down when I came in.
I keep one too, I said. A personal log. He looked at me.
It has the algae protein migration in it, I said.
And your arrival.
And several other things my commanding officer would describe as spiritual literature.
Something moved in his face.
Not a smile exactly, more like the possibility of one, tried briefly and then sat down. What do you do with them? He asked.
The entries. I don't know yet, I said. I've never had entries worth keeping before.
He was quiet for a moment. Then, keep them, he said.
The worth isn't clear while you're writing them. I thought about this all the way back to my bunk.
I thought about it while I opened my personal log and wrote, Day 14.
Directorate wants to manage the narrative.
He said the part that matters.
He said no.
He said, the architecture is familiar.
He told me to keep the log. I don't know what that means about him, and I don't know what it means about me. But I will be keeping it. On day 20, Sarah Thorin sent a message. Not to the station.
To him specifically, to the COM address he'd given as his contact, which was a general compact public relay address that suggested he had no permanent location. The message came through official Dominion diplomatic channels, which meant it was authenticated and logged in. Copies went to approximately 17 departments before it reached him. Khan handed him the printed message with the expression of someone delivering a very small grenade. I was not in the room. I know what it said because he told me, on day 21, at 2100, in the medical bay, in the specific way of someone reporting on something they're still processing. The message said, in full, Morrow. They tell me you're still at Vethkalos. Stop being stubborn about your leg and go where they send you. I owe you a conversation that I intend to have once I've finished the 17 things being put in front of me that are apparently more urgent. Don't make yourself hard to find. SVAO. He read this to me without expression. Then, he said, she knows about the leg. She knows you're at a border station, I said. She has access to your medical transfer status. She called me stubborn. You walked circuits 4 days early. He was quiet. She said she owes you a conversation, I said. She doesn't owe me anything, he said, not dismissively, but, as a matter of stated fact, the same way he filed everything. The operation had a goal. The goal was accomplished. I looked at him in his bed in the medical bay at Vethkalos, which was nobody's destination, which was a station people passed through or were assigned to by the calculus of institutional need, which would still smell like algae protein when he was gone. Morrow, I said. Sub-Commander. I think you should write back. He looked at me. I think, I said, carefully, that you spent 17 months treating this as a structural problem to be solved and, you solved it and, the solution is alive and, communicating and, has a precise and, somewhat autocratic written style, and, I think that is not the entirety of what is true about this situation. He was very still. I'm a thorough person, I said. You mentioned. I notice things. He said nothing. The way you set down the paper when I come in, I said. The way you held the container when you first drank the coffee. The way you said she's exceptional. The way I stopped. The architecture, I said. You told me structure holds the knot fine until it resolves. But, it also holds other things that need to stop being held. He looked at me for a long time. Then, he picked up his pen. He turned the paper over. I left him to it. He was transferred on day 23. Intelligence courier, efficient and fast, bound for Henneth Station where the full debrief would continue and, the Directorate would manage its narrative and, the ceasefire framework would travel through whatever channels brought it to a negotiating table. He said goodbye in the dock. Khan was there, and 2 other staff who had found reasons to be in the dock at the transfer time, and Commander Vason, who had her tea. He thanked each of us. Not formally. Specifically, he thanked Khan by name and referenced a specific intervention on the 3rd day, and thanked one of the staff by name for having located a replacement heating element for the bunk corridor unit, which had been bothering me for weeks and, apparently him as well, and he thanked the commander for the 3 weeks and she said something I couldn't hear that made the corner of his mouth do the thing it did. Then, he looked at me. You'll keep the log, he said. I'll keep the log, I said. The spatial data from the corridor, he said. I filed it with my testimony. But, there are details the formal record won't, he stopped. If anyone ever needs to go in again. The information is worth having. I know, I said. I'll make sure it's accessible. He nodded. He picked up his bag, small, one bag, which seemed like an absurd amount of material for a person who'd spent 17 months in enemy territory and, also like an accurate representation of a person who traveled functionally. He started for the courier hatch. Morrow, I said. He stopped. I didn't know what I was going to say. I'd been turning it over for 3 days and I still didn't know how to compact it into a sentence that was both precise and true. The math was wrong, I said finally.
You were right. He stood with his back to me for a moment. This time, he said. And he went through the hatch. Entry 914, personal log, Torvin Ailish, subcommander, Vethkalos border station, he's gone. Khan has already reassigned the bed.
The chair is still there, because it wasn't a medical chair, it was just a chair I put there, and moving it back seems like a form of erasure I'm not prepared for yet.
The heating element in bunk corridor 3 was replaced on day 19.
The algae protein smell has demonstrably retreated to its origin point at junction corridor A. Both of these things happened because he was here long enough for certain information to be exchanged.
Small corrections. The kind you don't notice until the irritant is gone. I have been trying to write the thing about the math.
The thing about what it means that he went in at 4 to 9% and that someone has to be the person who checked and that the board is not wrong to do what the board does but is also, in the specific case, wrong.
I can't write it cleanly. So I'll just write what I know.
There are 19 people in the Eastern Theater who will stop dying every day when the ceasefire framework reaches the table.
Maybe more. Probably more.
She was in a cell with a bed frame weapon.
He disagreed with the math. That's it. That's the whole thing. I don't have a better word for it than that. The ceasefire in the Eastern Theater was announced on the 48th day after Moro's transfer.
I know this because I was at Vethkalos, in my office, filing a routine debris scan report, when the compact-wide broadcast came through and every screen on the station interrupted itself to display the announcement in the particular formal blue that the compact reserves for matters of historical significance. I sat in front of my screen for 3 minutes before I went back to the debris scan. It seemed important to complete the debris scan. It was not important.
I completed it anyway.
Commander Vason made tea and did not stare at the wall. She stood in the observation bay and looked at the hollow corridor's edge, the dark seam of contested space that is the only view Vethkalos has that is not asteroid rock or pressurized module, and she drank her tea standing up, which I had never seen her do. I wrote in my log, day 971. Ceasefire announced. Eastern Theater. Then, I wrote, 48 days. Then, I wrote, 19 months plus 48 days equals approximately 21 months since the ambush at the hollow corridor. 21 months of a war that had a framework for resolution sitting in a diplomatic implant in an unrecoverable person. Then, I stopped writing because the math was making me feel something I didn't have a word for, the same word I'd been reaching for since entry 891, the one that wasn't heroism and wasn't tragedy and wasn't simple. I set the log down. I made myself a container of emergency instant and drank it, and I thought about the 400,000 and the 48 days and the 4 to 9%, and then I picked the log back up and wrote, there is not a clean sentence for this. So I'm going to stop trying to write one. 3 days after the ceasefire announcement, I received a message. Not official. Not through compact channels or diplomatic relay or anything that would generate copies for 17 departments. Through the general relay address, the public one, the one with no permanent location attached. It said, Subcommander Ailish. I've been told you kept thorough records of the events of my time at your station. I'm requesting copies unofficial, personal copies, for my own files. The formal record has already been sanitized to the point of being unrecognizable. I assume you know the feeling. Morrow I read it 3 times. Then, I wrote back, I know the feeling. Copies attached. Ailish. I attached entries 891 through 914. Everything. The algae protein smell and the chair and the gray canisters and the math and the conversation about the architecture and the day he walked circuits early and every single thing I had failed to file in official form because it read more like spiritual literature than military documentation. I sent it before I could think about it for too long. Then, I sat in my office with my hands on my desk and thought, that is either a significant professional misjudgment or the most accurate thing I have filed in 2 years and 4 months. His reply arrived 22 minutes later, both, probably. That's usually how it goes with the accurate ones. I want to document the part that happened after the ceasefire, because the official record ends with the ceasefire, ends with diplomatic cortex implant transmitted, framework accepted, cessation of hostilities declared, ongoing monitoring assigned to Eastern Theater Task Force, and that ending makes it sound closed. Things do not close cleanly. I have been at this station long enough to know that things do not close cleanly. They develop complications that the official record does not have a field for. The complication in this case took the form of a second message, 6 days after the first, through the general relay, with a different sender address. The sender address was authenticated through Dominion diplomatic channels. The authentication took me 40 minutes to confirm because I'd never processed a message from that particular authentication tier before and had to look up the protocol. It said, Subcommander Ailish. My name is Sarah. I believe you know who I am. I'm writing to you because I've read your logs, Morrow shared them with my approval, and because there are things that occurred during the events you documented that I would like an accurate record of, and I'm told you're the person who creates accurate records. I have been through 6 formal debriefs, 4 medical assessments, 3 political briefings, and 2 meetings with the Compact's official history documentation unit, whose name is accurate only in the sense that documentation occurs. What I have not had is a conversation with someone who writes things down the way they actually were. Would you be willing? SVAO I read it 4 times. 5. I set it down. I picked it up. I replied, yes. The first conversation happened via Comlink, 12 days after the ceasefire. She was at the Dominion Capitol by then, and what I gathered from her word choices and background sounds was some kind of formal reception suite, which meant she was having this conversation in between obligations that were themselves large and demanding. She talked the way I had begun to expect from her written voice, precise, slightly compressed, inclined to deliver significant information without telegraphing its weight. She had Morrow's quality of not announcing emotional content, but, where his came from construction, hers felt more like selection. She had a wider range and was choosing her words from it with care. I want to tell you about the vent access, she said, early in the first conversation. The vent access to the detention facility, I said. Yes. A pause. The official record says Morrow accessed the facility through the maintenance conduit system using intelligence gathered during the operation. That's accurate as far as it goes. Another pause. What it doesn't say is that I mapped the conduit system. I made a note. In the facility. During the 16 months. She said this with a particular evenness. I had limited materials and limited opportunity, but I had time. The guard rotations, the structural sounds, the airflow patterns. I built a model in my head of the facility's internal geography. When Morrow arrived with his external structural diagram, we put them together. I thought about what Morrow had told me, she was essential to it. The lack of emphasis. The precision of essential. He told me it was a collaborative extraction, I said. He would characterize it that way, yes. Her voice did something, not warmth exactly, but a specific quality that I have since decided was the way she registers being known accurately by someone. He's consistent about that. It was, in fact, collaborative. But the debrief record describes it as a rescue, which implies a helpless party and a capable party, and that's the wrong model, I said. Yes. I wrote, SVAO, Day 1 conversation. Mapped facility internally during 16-month detention. Airflow patterns. Guard rotations. Structural sounds. Built a mental geography. Combined with Morrow's external intelligence to construct route. Then, the board filed her as unrecoverable. She spent the time they allocated to her recovery mapping the architecture of the facility she was in. I underlined this. Not something I do. I underlined it. Can I ask you something? I said. That's the purpose of these conversations. When did you know he was coming? A silence. Longer than her other silences, which were functional. This one was different in quality, not hesitation, but arrival. The silence of someone reaching a place they've been heading toward. I didn't know he was coming, she said. Specifically. Another pause. But she stopped.
I didn't agree with the board's determination. I knew my own survival probability. I knew the facility's protocols. I knew I was a political asset and would be maintained for negotiation purposes. My survival probability was not the 4 or 9% that the board calculated from the ambush data, because the board calculated from incomplete information. Your own calculation, I said. My calculation was approximately 30% long term. Not high. But not zero. The board closed the question at 0. Her voice stayed level. I am aware that an operational body cannot function on 30%. I understand why the determination was filed. She paused, I'm not criticizing the board. But, I said. But, I was in the facility. And, I was 30%. And, that's a different thing to sit with than 0. I sat with this. Did it help? I said. Knowing your own number was different. The silence again, the arriving kind. Yes, she said. It helped. The math was mine and I kept it. A pause. And, then, someone else kept it too. I didn't say anything. He told me, she said, before we left the facility, that he'd calculated the probability at 4 to 9% and gone in anyway. He said it like a statement of fact. He wasn't telling me it was a brave thing. He was just, she stopped. Reporting, I said. Reporting, she agreed. And, I told him my calculation was 30% and, he said, she stopped. I waited. He said, that's better math. I wrote it down. Then, I wrote, she said, that's better math, with the same quality he says things. Like it's the truest sentence available. Like the precision of it is the point. Then, 2 people in a Keth detention facility in the dark, arguing probability in a whisper. Then, I am still trying to find the word. We had 4 conversations over 3 weeks. I have transcribed all of them. I will not include all of them here because some of it is hers and not mine to document at length, the 16 months, the months before that, the political dimensions of a ceasefire that I am not qualified to analyze. But, there are pieces I want to preserve. The 3rd conversation, she said, I want to ask you about him. At your station. What he was like. And, I told her about the circuits and the coffee and the gray canisters and the paper going face down when I came in and what he said about the math and the architecture and the entry that started with algae protein and ended with him. She was quiet for a long time. He kept a log too, she said. Did you know that? I suspected, I said. When we were moving through the corridor, she said, he had 12 hours during the final passage where I was sedated and he was navigating alone and he couldn't write it down because he needed both hands and full attention. He told me afterward, when I was coherent and we were at your station and he was describing the passage to me, he said it was the most disorienting 12 hours. Not the danger. The not writing. I thought about this. He said it was how he knew what was real, she said. Writing it down. If he wrote it, it had happened. If it had happened, there was a record. If there was a record, he had been there and had done the things and they were done. The structure, I said. He told me about the structure. Yes. Her voice had the quality again, the being known accurately quality. He told me about your conversation. About the architecture. He said you understood it. I looked at my personal log on the desk in front of me, at the entries accumulating, at the dates and the observations and the things that were too true for official filing. I understand the function of it, I said. I write things down to make them real too. I know, she said. A pause. I read your entries, she said. The ones he sent. I want you to know the things you wrote about him. They're accurate. Completely accurate. I've read a lot of documentation about these events in the past weeks and yours is the only thing that's accurate. I didn't know what to say to that. He's not, she started, and then I heard something in her voice I hadn't heard before, something that was choosing carefully not for diplomacy but for truth, looking for the right container.
He's not comfortable with being seen accurately. He prefers the structural framing.
The math. The operational language. I know, I said. Your entries see him accurately. I know, I said again.
I wasn't sure if I should have sent them. You should have, she said. He needed someone to have been paying attention. I wrote this down later, in my log, entry 937, she said, he needed someone to have been paying attention. 19 months of the compact not paying attention, and, then, 23 days at a station that smells like protein paste, and, apparently that was enough. I don't know whether to find that reassuring or devastating.
I find it both.
The fourth conversation was shorter. She was about to enter a formal session with the Compact Diplomatic Assembly, the real session, the one that would ratify the ceasefire framework and, formally end the Eastern Theater as an active conflict zone. I could hear the sounds of it in the background, and her voice was different, the selecting carefully quality replaced by something more compressed, more formal, the register of a person who was about to walk into a room and be the ceasefire rather than just carry it. I want to tell you one more thing, she said.
All right, I said. In the facility.
After the first month. Before the second month, she stopped. Then, there was a period where I recalculated. Where the 30% became 15 and, then, less. Where the math started to close. I was very still.
I'm telling you this because you're the accurate record, she said.
Not because she paused.
I managed it. I rebuilt the number.
But, I want there to be a record that it happened, because the official record will not contain it and, the official record should not contain it but, it should exist somewhere.
It exists here, I said.
Yes. Her voice was steady. There was a period where the math closed.
And, then, I recalculated.
And then, a pause, and then, 17 months in, someone came through event access and said he had 11 minutes and, did I want to get out? I held the calm, the math was wrong, I said. The math, she said, was wrong. And, then, she walked into the room and, I heard the formal sounds of a session beginning and, she was gone. Entry 952, Personal Log, Torvin Ailish, Subcommander, Vethkalos Border Station, Year 3, the ceasefire ratification was announced at 14:30 station time today. All screens, formal blue, historical significance.
I watched it with Commander Vason in the observation bay.
She said, who writes the history of a thing that was supposed to be impossible? I said, someone with a log, probably. She looked at me for 3 seconds, which is long for Vason.
Then, she went to make tea.
I have been trying, since entry 891, to find the word for what Kale Morrow is.
Not heroic. Or not only heroic.
The word heroic implies sacrifice willingly made toward a larger cause, and that's accurate in the way that all partial accuracy is accurate. But, he didn't talk about it like sacrifice. He talked about it like methodology. Like the problem had an available solution and, he was the available person.
Not reckless.
Reckless implies an absence of calculation, and, the man calculated everything including which way to handle the liability so the compact wouldn't be exposed if he was captured. Not exceptional, in the way people use that word to mean beyond ordinary. He was ordinary in ways that mattered. He wanted coffee and, he kept logs and, he had a leg that healed wrong and, he was not fine and, he said so. I keep landing on a phrase from my own entry that I didn't intend as anything, someone has to be the person who checked.
Not, I will be the hero. Not, someone should check. Someone has to. Present tense. Active obligation.
The checking is the thing that has to happen and, he was someone and, the conjunction of those two facts produced the 17 months.
I think that's the word I've been looking for. Not heroism. Obligation.
The specific, precise, unromantic obligation of a person who has identified a thing that needs to be done and is able to do it and, therefore does it. I do not know if that is more or less than heroism.
I know that it is what happened.
I know that 19 months of efficient grief and, moved forward resources would have left a woman with a 30% number and, a bedframe weapon alone in a facility in the Western Corridor until her number ran out. I know that 48 days after someone disagreed with the math, guns stopped firing in the Eastern Theater. I know that I am a thorough person at a station that smells like protein paste, and I kept a log, and the log is accurate, and accuracy is not the smallest thing. 6 weeks after the ceasefire, Morrow sent a second message. It said, the directorate suspended the charges.
Conditional cooperation, as expected.
I've been offered a contract position, compact intelligence, independent contractor basis.
No commission.
Technically I work for myself, which means I am once again my own problem. The Eastern Theater Monitoring Task Force needs a liaison familiar with the corridor geography. I told them I know a thorough person at a border station who has detailed logs.
I hope you don't mind.
I sat in my office for a while with my hands on my desk.
Then, I wrote back, I don't mind.
Send the request through official channels so I have a document trail.
Also, the algae protein smell is completely gone. As of this morning. I don't know what changed.
Ailish's reply arrived 17 minutes later. Some things resolve on their own timeline.
Not most things. But, some. I filed entry 961 that night. It is short. Year 3, Month 4. Eastern Theater, ceasefire holding. Corridor, monitoring ongoing. Station, 37 personnel, the chair still in medical, the algae protein smell resolved by unknown mechanism.
I have been keeping this log for a long time without knowing what it was for. I think it was for this, to be the accurate record of a thing that happened at a station no one was watching.
A woman kept 30% and a bedframe weapon.
A man disagreed with the math.
Someone had to be the person who checked. It is a small story. People are alive because of it. I can't write a cleaner ending than that. So I won't.